Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new video here on the channel. As you can tell, before you I have unified all of the legendaries in their glorious glory, and prepare for me to be using the word glory a lot this video, because when it comes to just how awesome the legendary variant series is, glory does not begin to describe how fantastic all of these characters are, decked up in their gold and black alts, and in the case for Imaginators we of course have Tritope and Pit Boss in red and gold, which is just as glorious, mind you. Gold and glorious both begin with the same letter, so the alliteration is used for great effect, you could go as far as saying. Regardless, I've been rambling on far too long, so it's time for me to address the video's topic. If you've read the title, I'm giving every element of Skylanders one new legendary to add to this incredible cast before you. So naturally, what are these characters I'd select from each of the 10 elements to join these cast of legendary characters? Let's roll that intro and find out. You guys know already how much I love myself a shifty little pull focus, so naturally our first choice for the magic element is going to be Splat, as you could tell from the pull focusing skill that I just presented before you. And the reason why I chose Splat is because she would work so well with a gold and black colour palette. I mean, Splat's concept art was originally for a dark elemental character, meaning that she had a dark colour palette to begin with. So naturally, blending together this incredible design as well as the concept art you see before you on screen to make up for a legendary aesthetic of this character would look really fitting. And above all, she's just a really colourful character, so having that gold and black contrast would be so nice to see, mind you. It's a shame we didn't get to see it really, especially with the particular plastics chosen for this figurine. You know, we have the horn and the paint, which are slightly translucent, so seeing a translucent black type plastic would have been really nice to see. So above all, it's a combination of the fact that we have concept art for Splat leaning in towards a darker aesthetic, as well as the fact that a black and gold colour palette would work really well for this character, especially her weaponry. Like seriously, having a black paint line would look so incredibly awesome that just thinking about a legendary concept for this character is getting me all pumped up. So naturally, that, my friends, is why I would choose Splat to be for additional magic legendary. So next up we have Flashwing. The great thing about Flashwing is that she has a Jade variant already with greens and golds, of course, so naturally swapping out these colours for the iconic black and gold colour palette for the legendary variant series would be incredibly fitting. Just imagine her crystals lined in a gold aesthetic and then her scales being in black. It would be really cool and incredibly fitting for the earth element, because she'd really give off this idea of minerals and just naturally the idea of Earth incarnate, so naturally she's aesthetically appropriate for the legendary variant series. And on top of that, we already know how glorious this character looks with sharp colour contrasts, because the Jade variant of her is everlasting proof of that concept. For the water element, I chose to add Deep Dive Gilgrunt to the legendary cast, purely because with 5 incarnations of Gilgrunt, you'd expect that they would have came up with some sort of legendary iteration, but we never saw a legendary Gilgrunt see the light of day. And of all of the different Gilgrunt incarnations, I feel as though this one would be the most fitting for it aesthetically, since this Gilgrunt has armour, and if characters like Blades or Igniter have proven anything, it's that armor looks incredible with a legendary aesthetic, just because gold and black are so fitting for armor based characters. So just seeing Deep Dive Gilgrunt's helmet in black and gold would have just brought out such a sharp contrast and an excellent attention to detail, to where it's such a huge shame that we saw yet another legendary jetpack rather than a legendary Gilgrunt, for example. So naturally this is a huge missed opportunity, and I really wish that for a brand new water legendary we could have seen legendary Deep Dive Gilgrunt. For the fire element, I would personally choose to add Ember as a legendary character. Now, we've seen already for blacks and golds repeated constantly, so naturally having a traditional legendary variant with this character wouldn't make the most sense, because she's already black and gold as is. A legendary wouldn't add much to the design that we haven't seen already. So for those of you having a question in your mind as to whether legendary Ember would have the traditional black and gold colour palette or the red and gold colour palette that was presented to us with our two legendary senseis, Tri-Tip and Pit Boss, well, personally, I think it's a damn shame that they changed up the colour palette of the legendary variants and didn't include Ember as one of them, because she is by far the most fitting design of any sensei for the legendary colour palette. Imagine changing out all of the blacks on her suit for reds instead. A red samurai armor would be fitting for the design, and it would just look so damn cool. The sharp contrast would just really expand upon this design and make it look so much cooler than it is already. I would just love to see her armor decked out in reds and golds. So ultimately, why change the color palette of the legendaries without choosing the best design for the aesthetic to go alongside it? Makes no sense to me, and that, my friends, is why Ember would be the perfect addition for the fire element in terms of the legendary cast of the franchise. And what would be great is that Legendary Igniter would finally get a companion within the fire element for the legendary series, because as it stands at the moment, Ignitor is the only fire legendary. Then again, I suppose they did that because they peaked with Legendary Igniter and knew they never could have done better for fire element, because Igniter's just already so perfect as is. The tech element legendary I would add to the game was a no-brainer, Drobot. He's a huge fan favourite, and decking out Drobot in a gold and black aesthetic would look so damn cool, especially with his armour already, because as we've established, characters with armour look awesome in a legendary aesthetic, with the black and gold really bringing attention to detail and being very fitting aesthetically for the design. And naturally getting to see Drobot alongside all of the other legendaries would have just been so cool, because that would have just given the legendary cast such an overpowered character to work with. I mean, granted, there are already plenty of overpowered characters in the legendary cast, but adding Drobot to that cast just makes it even grander. So yes, if I was to add one tech Skylander to the legendary lineup, it would absolutely be Drobot, given how cool it would look and the fact that he's a huge fan favourite, so you can't go wrong with more of what we love. For the undead element, I would personally choose to add Fright Rider as a brand new legendary, purely because his suit decked out with black and gold, and then also making all of his skin gold as well, would make for really sharp colour contrast that would look very fitting for design and really expand upon it by giving it just such a different colour aesthetic to what we see with the regular rendition of the character. Not to mention getting to see more elves decked out in the legendary aesthetics would have been beyond glorious to have seen. And naturally, Fright Rider, unfortunately, is one of the most forgotten Skylanders, with the problem being that this is really the only version of Fright Rider we get outside of additional chase variants that he got. So giving him a legendary variant could have really kept him within our minds these last few years, because all of the legendary Skylanders are all incredibly memorable, with the fact that they have just such a unique and sharply contrasting colour palette to call their own. So seeing that applied to Fright Rider with the blacks and golds and the potential that all of that possesses is ultimately what would have made Fright Rider a perfect legendary. So it's a shame that we never saw the light of day for a Fright Rider legendary to be added to the already incredible cast of legendary characters. As for who I would add from the air element to the legendary cast, it would have to be a return to SSA in the form of Warnado, purely because I feel like his shell being turned black, and then of course all of the light blue elements of his skin being turned gold, would look so cool. Imagine his tornado being gold as well, or even black. Either way you spin it, this variant would look incredibly cool, because credit where credit is due of Warnado. Sure, whilst I don't enjoy his gameplay, I do love the design, and seeing this design decked out with a legendary aesthetic would have been so fitting, because the blacks and golds would not only contrast each other very well, but it would really complement the design at hand. As I said earlier, a black shell with golden skin would look so cool, and I would also love to see that air aesthetic, of course, imprinted onto his head, being, more brought out by the colours of the golds. That would, of course, be applied to his head, I'd imagine. So if you were to expand upon the legendary cast from Spyro's Adventure, I would love to have seen Warnado been one of those characters that they tackled for the legendary aesthetic. So naturally, that's why for the air element, I would like to add to the legendary cast none other than Warnado. Never thought I'd see the light of day to where I praised Warnado, but here we are, I suppose. When I was making this list, I knew for a fact that I needed a swapper in here somewhere, and luckily for us, that's where the life element comes in, because Stink Bomb would make for a perfect addition to the legendary cast. First of all, for different shades of green on his face and his arms, of course, would look so cool with that black and gold contrast. And then on top of that, he also has his shurikens that would look really cool, decked up in gold, as would his robes, because his gold and brown colour palette is already sharply contrasting as is, so by changing that up to a black and gold colour palette instead would look so much more glorious with a sharp contrast, just really bringing out the detail and the gloriousness of this design. It would really expand upon the design, just applying a legendary aesthetic to it. And of all of the swappers that didn't get a legendary form, I feel like this definitely would have been the most fitting. Like, imagine being able to swap this out with legendary Night Shift and legendary Free Ranger. They would create such awesome legendary combinations amongst the Swap Force cast. So without a shadow of a doubt, for the life element, I would add to the legendary cast Stink Bomb. Next up, for the light element, I'd have to go with Nightlight. The problem with Nightlight in terms of his design is that his figurine can be a little boring, considering that there's very little contrast in colours. The figurine, for the most part, is entirely white, and it's rather blocky looking. So imagine instead decking it out with blacks and golds to sharply contrast one another. It would look so cool, and not to mention, comparatively, you take the regular Nightlight and the legendary Nightlight, and you have two juxtaposed ideas, because culturally Nightlight is based on the religious angel, so naturally this would be a light angel, a holy angel, but swap it out for a black and gold aesthetic would make him more of a devilish angel. So you'd have a contrast between literal light and dark within one design. So for fleshiness that could be created from a legendary version of this character, and by fleshiness I mean how more they could flesh out his design, and the sharp colour contrast to fix my few problems with the design of this figurine is ultimately what gives legendary Nightlight such a huge potential, which I'm ashamed they didn't take advantage of. Now, the dark element was tricky, mostly because the legendary aesthetic implies black and gold, but most of the dark characters are black and gold already. However, looking at the legendary aesthetic for Imaginators, a red and gold colour palette would work really well for Starcast. My apologies for stuttering right now, that's what happens when I go off script, but I felt as though my passion would carry this video as is, and so far I feel as though that's proven true. But going back to the design at hand, I think having Starcast's big blue hands being made red instead would look so cool, and would contrast the black galaxy type design of the rest of his body so well. I would have loved to have seen a legendary Starcast, and he is really the only Dark Skylander that I feel as though a legendary aesthetic would be fitting for. So naturally Starcast kind of wins by default. But regardless of all that, Starcast, without a shadow of a doubt, get the pun, because he makes shadows with one of his abilities. But, you know, now that I have cringed my way through this explanation of why Starcast would make an awesome legendary, it's time to conclude this video without further ado. And yes, that is why, once again, without a shadow of doubt nor a hint of sarcasm, Starcast would make for the perfect dark legendary to add to the already incredible legendary cast of Skylanders. As you can tell, I'm using the same setup of characters as I did for the introduction, and that's purely because they look glorious in all of their legendary unison and everything. So why the heck not take advantage of this setup for a second time to conclude the video with. And of course, the main attraction right here is for Gloriousness himself, the Glory Incarnate Igniter, as you can see, having just been zoomed in upon. But regardless of all that, I sure hope you enjoyed the discussion video. I definitely had a blast recording and editing it together. So let me know in the comment section below how wrong I am and what legendaries from each element you would choose to add to this cast, mind you. But with that all being said and done, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will be seeing you in another Skylanders video. But until that moment arises, peace!